Hello, everyone. I wasn't particularly intending to speak today, but as it happens, the topic of today's debate is really close to my heart. And as I've just been introduced, travel is, I think, in my soul. I think it's fair to say. I've lived in many countries, and I think this is really going to be a bit of a story time rather than a kind of seminar or anything. I'd love to do a seminar later on, a more academic talk, but for now, I'll tell you about my experience as a UK and Canadian citizen and why I wanted to travel. Because it seems to me, many people here say, but why did you leave your own country? You know, everybody wants to go where you're from, so why did you leave? Growing up, I had a really great childhood, and my mum had a bed and breakfast. So I always had the experience of travelers around me, and I'm so grateful for that experience. I mean, on the one hand, there were strangers in my house, but on the other hand, I would see these different faces, and I was already starting to figure out, oh, that person's from Japan, or that person's Chinese, because where I'm from, it's all Caucasian white faces. And so I was having this really interesting exposure. Thanks, Mum, really, for bringing me up in this kind of microcosm of a travel situation. And then my mum was a very unique lady. She's kind of a businesswoman, but also she loved to travel. And she was like the original couch surfer, if you're familiar with the couch surfing movement. So we would do house exchanges, and she would go online. This is also when the internet was fresh, and I think there were even magazines with these houses that you could exchange, and you would get in contact, and then you would have this huge trust and going to their house, and then they would come to our house. And my mum took us youth hosteling, and she would always find ways of traveling at a low cost. So then I wanted to travel after I finished my studies. But my school said, no, Kim's a bright girl. She should go to university. And my mum said, yep, you're not going anywhere until you've studied at university. So I was a bit upset. I was very upset, actually, because I was 18 and I thought I knew everything and I just wanted to travel. But I went to Cardiff University. I studied literature and psychology. And afterwards, I was really in love with psychology, and I wanted to be a psychologist. But in the UK, you have to study for a further 6 or 7 years to become a chartered psychologist, and very few people can actually afford to do that. I definitely couldn't, because I had already taken out all of my student loans, all of the loans available to me. And so the other thing I really wanted to do was travel. And still I had the problem of I don't have any money. So I went online and I searched, and by chance, behind my university was an organization that enabled people to do volunteer workshops. And so I went on a work camp, first of all. I went to Estonia, and there weren't really many flights to Estonia way back then. I'm pretty old. And I thought, wow, this is exciting. And they were all speaking Russian, and yet it was Estonia. And I was like, oh, Soviet history, this is really interesting. And I went back, and I found out about European voluntary service. And some of my friends, Cardiff's quite a good university, so my friends were like, what are you doing? Why are you going to volunteer? Shouldn't you be getting a real job and getting on with your life? And I said, no. I was like, no, it's fine. I really want to do some traveling before I take on a serious career path. And so I went to the Czech Republic. And while I was there, I met all of the other volunteers who were in neighboring European countries, because we would come to Prague for training. I wasn't actually based in Prague, but I was near enough. And so I had this wonderful network of other young people, free-spirited people who wanted to do something a bit different. And we were all doing very different social projects. So I was with the Central and European Environmental Partnership, and we did lots of work about sustainability and grassroots and alternative travel, and solar panels, and renewable energy sources. So again, this was a long time ago, but it was really interesting for me, and it was quite progressive. So I was learning a lot of things on top of being in a very different culture. Then I went back to the UK. I got a grant from the European Union to do my own project, because I thought this was such a useful thing for me to do. I'm a real introvert, and so it was a huge thing. My brother couldn't believe that I had gone by myself anywhere, and I promoted volunteering amongst lower income communities. And the UK economy at that time was really down. So my friends who had studied vocational subjects, the architects, the physiotherapists, the medics, they weren't getting jobs in their field. My brother, I have an older brother, he graduated from Warwick, which is another very good university, and he couldn't get a job in his field. And so I thought, what's the point to stay in the UK at this time? I did a journalism diploma, and then I met somebody who said, you know what? I work in the Middle East. I don't pay any tax. It's sunny all year round. I said, what? Could this be real? I went online, and because I have a literature background, that was acceptable to work as a teacher. So I went to the Emirates, and I started teaching. I'd already done some tutoring in the Czech Republic, but there I had a proper teaching job. And from there, I kept going. I was just so enjoying the experience of being abroad. And even though I was in my young 20s and I was in a Muslim country, I just loved it. It was every day something new. And I think part of the thrill of being abroad is if you have the openness. Okay, it's important that you go with little expectation and a big curiosity. You have the huge chance to learn more than you ever can in your formal studies. And it's always the thrill of connecting with people, no matter what nationality, what religion, which gender, it doesn't matter, because we're all human. After the Emirates, I went to Oman. I went to Canada because my parents moved to Canada. And then people are saying, well, why didn't you stay in Canada? Canada's an amazing country. Yes, but how much tax do we pay in Canada? 40%. And also, I had quite a strange experience in Canada because I hadn't grown up there. And Canada is so very multicultural. And I was on this mission to find out, what does it mean to be Canadian? Because it seemed to me that everyone was from somewhere else. And so there I did another volunteer program. I went to the Arctic Canada, and I worked with an Aboriginal community, an Inuvialuit community. And again, this was one of the biggest learning curves in my life. And I began to appreciate more different types of intelligence, like native wisdom, native intelligence. Because for them, formal Western schooling was just something that they were made to do by the Canadian government. I think the story of the residential schools has been recently blown up in the worldwide news. And the community that I worked with were so very smart and so in tune with nature. Like, they can survive in -30 pretty much, a lot of the year round. So it taught me a lot about resilience, about, again, open-mindedness, about connecting with people. And then I still felt that I had the energy to travel. And so I went to Hong Kong, I went to Sri Lanka. And then I decided that I really wanted to be a psychologist, but I still didn't have the money. So I went back to the Middle East. I went to Saudi Arabia. And at that time, I could bank about 80%, probably 90% of my salary. So I was very lucky. I was able to pay for my master's and work at the same time. And there, this was still when women couldn't drive. I had to wear an abaya. There were only women allowed in the university. There I had this really unique experience of re-evaluating my own gender. what is my power as a female? And I was able to study and work at the same time. I paid everything off as I went, and I also paid my student debts because I still had my student debts, some of my debts from my initial studies. And then I was very fortunate because I ended up getting a job immediately afterwards as a school psychologist. And I really feel that all of this travel has so informed both my professional life and how I can relate to people, because I feel like we are all connected in some way. It's not always obvious, but there's always something you can connect to another person with. And the more experiences you have, then the more you have as a sort of bank of relatable conversation topics. And in terms of therapy, I quite like cognitive behavioral therapy, which is about changing how you think, changing your thoughts, changing your feelings. And having spoken to so many people all over the world, I can see that there are always more than one way of looking at a situation. I think one of my favorite examples would be about the perception of time. Okay? Along the way, I got married to a Turkish man, and I think some of you may know who he is. He's Professor Erdogan. He's at Team University. Okay, so in my initial trips to Turkey, we would have breakfast, and I would say, well, what are we going to do today? What time will lunch be? What time were we going to do this? It'll happen today. For a British person, this is extremely difficult to compute. We're very regimented. We like to be punctual for everything. And so from him and from my experiences of my short stays in Turkey, I've learned to appreciate that time can be a different construct in different places. All right? I think as well, there's some downsides of all of this travel have been not having the pension, not having a healthcare system to go back to. So I have to be sure that I have health insurance wherever I go. But we have 2 kids. They're here. And I'm not sure that moving around negates stability, because for us, we're quite a solid family unit, and we even have 2 dogs. So we give them some stability, and we try to ensure that they're in a good school environment so that they can make friends. But I think one other thing that I would say is a negative, or that I miss, is the exposure to news. And I'm not always sure what's going on in the world. I have to make more of an effort to read the news, whereas if I was in an English-speaking environment, the news would kind of come to me. For a while, I was vegan, and when I came to Uzbekistan, I was like, okay, I'm not vegan anymore. It's fine, it's over. But it's about finding your tribe, and sometimes in some cultures, you have to fight a lot harder. You have to really, really search. And I'm so happy for this eco cafe, because it's really helped to find more similarly minded people. But this can be a big kind of plus or minus, depending on the kind of solidarity you're looking for with people. Like if you want a Muslim environment, then certain countries will be great, and others maybe not so much. Or if you're into the great outdoors, then the air pollution in Tashkent can be a hindrance sometimes. But overall, I would not trade these travel experiences at all. I'm not sure where we're going to go next. But I really believe that even if you're from Uzbekistan, like, I'm sorry to say that, but I worked in the presidential school last year, and my students were really desperate to find opportunities to leave. But we kept searching, and we did find things. And I think there is usually a way, somehow. It might not be the most I don't want to say the most legal way. It might not be an obvious way, but there are usually ways and means to following your dreams. So please, male or female, doesn't matter. I think if you really are determined, it's not always about money, because I never had any. it's about resourcefulness and determination. Any questions? I'm happy to answer maybe later or now. I don't mind what our timings are like.
Thank you.
Yeah. My husband as well, by the way, he's Turkish. He went to the Anatolian high school, so he was not from a rich background, and he did all of his education through full scholarship. Okay, so maybe he's lucky in that he's bright, but he still always found his way to travel around and to find different opportunities. So, yeah, why not? Why not try? Find your strengths and follow them.
I have a question. So you change countries a lot of times, and what's about your social network? All the time you change it, or you keep in touch with your previous friends and find new one? Can you tell about it?
I think this is where the internet is a huge blessing. It's really the biggest blessing. Although in the beginning, I would still write letters to people. And when I went home, and I would make sure that if I went home, I would visit them. So now I'm really grateful. I still have my friends from when I was 4 years old. We were very close when we were at school. And along the way, you have we call them fair weather friends, the situational friends. But then you also meet people who you have a genuine connection with. And I always try to honor a connection with somebody. And so I keep in touch. On the way here, I was talking to a couple of friends I made in Saudi Arabia. Because there was such an intense environment. Some of us trauma bonded. Otherwise, we were just friends by commonality. And I think it's a really precious part of this experience. It's a real honor to have these friendships all over the world. And my husband as well has a very big network, and he nurtures it on LinkedIn. And when you have opportunities, then you can share opportunities. And it keeps you kind of grounded as well, because maybe you're having a bad time in your new environment, and then I call a friend back home in the UK. Oh man, I'm just cooking once a day because the bills are so expensive now. So I think every country has its problems, and your friends will tell you the truth. You know, you can look at the media to tell you what's happening, but if you call your friend or your relative, you probably get a different picture. Maybe more accurate one. Yeah.
Okay, guys, make some noise, applause, please.
Thank you.